Hey, in my former life, I was what's the best way to say this? A drainage engineer, a channel engineer. It was all about trying to make things better. It was some erosion, you fix it with rock, and you lay down back the slopes and all that stuff. And a lot of times whenever I would think about that type of work, I always thought about coffee, because coffee is one of those things to where you kind of wonder how it really works. And in this case, we're talking about pour overs. And when we look at a pour over device in general, we see it for what it is, right? It's some type of cone shape or flat bottom dripper, as we have here. But a lot of us, or at least some of us, don't go to the extreme. Like, I'm not that extreme. The people who actually make these devices are the ones who are the extremists of seeing what they can do to make it different, better. And again, I've said it before, you've heard it before. All we're really trying to do with these brewers is to manipulate flow to provide the most extraction that we can get in our cup of coffee. So we're going to take our friend, our best friend, a friend that we've known for a very long time, and we're going to play around with the Hario V60. This is our first one. So I always used to get mad when people would talk about, okay, take a cross section and look at the device for what it is. So now you have a 2D image of what it is. I never really could understand it totally, but I'm doing that to you now. So Hario V60 is a 60-degree shaped cone, right? So isn't crazy steep, but it's pretty relatively steep compared to other brewers that are out there. So when you think about it, let's just take a hill. Let me get something to demonstrate this. Or a slope. This is a better idea of what I'm trying to talk about. So this is essentially the Hario V60 right there, right there. So that's the slope. So if you were to put a pebble at the top, how fast can it really go? We're not going to be talking about the papers or nothing like that. That's a story for another day. Trust me, because that can get wacky too. So what would you think will happen to the pebble? It will go relatively fast. We can get the law of speed and velocity and all that to see how fast it travels. So in this case, the pebble is a water drop, and it's going to go pass through a bed of coffee, right? So this is a Hario V60. We're not going to even talk about the ridges or the least amount of ridges that's actually in this actual device, and how it has grooves that come up to kind of help direct flow of water, right? Okay. This one is more so the same. This is the Mugen dripper, about the same type of 60-degree pitch. The difference is that there's no grooves in it at all. So what usually happens is when you put water in it, the coffee tends to stick to the sides quite a bit, a lot more compared to the regular Hario V60. Again, paper, filters, whatever, a story for another day. But it does it differently just because there's no grooves, really any pronounced grooves to help direct the water. It actually takes a very long time for the water to actually drain out of this particular brewer because of this particular design. Okay? One brewer is not better than the other. You just have to understand exactly what you're doing with them. And as I have gotten a lot of gear, they do the same thing. They play around and do things to coffee that, that you want to be done, We're not gonna even talk about like material, because that plays a part in it, but I don't think as much as people think it does. But again, we're gonna test all this stuff. So let's move on. Here's a flat bottom dripper. You can see that just by looking at this April brewer, the slant isn't as pronounced. I don't know what that is. It's probably like a 45-degree bend. And the cool thing about this particular brewer is that it has these little channels at the bottom to direct the water after it's been transformed with the coffee downwards, right? But again, the cool thing, saving grace about flat bottom brewers is that they don't really worry about so much of what's happening on the side, because most of the action is happening in the middle. I mean, that's to the extent too of the cone shaped drippers too. But we're not as concerned with the sides, because that's not what these drippers are really mainly made for. It's a flat bottom, trying to get that even extraction, full body to an extent, but more balanced cup compared to a cone shaped filter. Okay, brewer. Now I'm going to show you two extremes. The next one is the deep 27. Now, right there. Now look at that. That is steep as fuck. That is fast, just by the nature of the brewer itself, the way that it's designed. And of course the paper filter does help. It does have some grooves in here to direct the flow, so it can have the least amount of channeling happening in this brewer whatsoever. But it's fast. It works really fast just because of the law of gravity. It's so steep. Imagine if you're on a hill and you're coming down that hill. That's almost like a 1-to-1 ratio. You're gonna go down that hill so fast that now you're gonna have to start thinking about size of grounds. You can't go too coarse with it, right? Because it's not going to have enough contact time in order to transform, manipulate that coffee to provide the right extraction, right? So those are some of the things that we have to look at when we're actually trying to understand our coffee. All of these brewers work. They have their own ways of creating magic for us. They all work. They do amazing, great things for us. There's pros and cons to all of them, right? But at the end of the day, we have to understand the geometry, what it's actually doing, and if it actually makes sense for us when we're actually brewing our cup of coffee. Now, let's talk about this one first. Okay? This one I never really wanted to get. Thought it was gimmicky. But something about this brewer just kept calling my name. It's exaggerated. If you look at the Hario V60, it has essentially the same shape. So that's how the slant works. Okay. And then the grooves on this device are very pronounced, very aggressive. They're deep. They say there are about 20 of them, right? 20 grooves, and then they just concave straight to the middle. This brewer so far, I thought the Droll Dripper was fast. This one's the fastest one. This one's pretty fast too. But something about the grooves and the design makes it extremely fast. You have to be careful with this one. You're going to have to go a little bit finer on your grind, just because it has no time to really extract the coffee. I think last time I used this one, I got lucky with my grind. It's about 18% extraction. Still tasted fine and lovely, but I like a 20% extraction. But that means I have to go a lot finer, okay? This is just kind of the nature of the beast with this one, and it keeps the coffee hot because of the material. Again, story for another day. Now, this one, this is called a UFO. Very weird type of design to me. It looks weird. It's ceramic. It's made extremely well. But when you look at it objectively, you have the middle right here. Okay. And then we're going to keep going. Keep going. About right there. Okay. Look at that slant. That is literally the biggest slant, the biggest angle that you have here. You put a pebble up here, and it's going to take its good time to come all the way down. Again, the first time I used this brewer, I used a cone-shaped brewer, which you can use that to filter. And I think if you use a cone shape, because of the ridges, the way it's actually designed, it actually really doesn't fit it too well. I think the flow, I have to do more tests, is that it's a lot faster. However, if you're to use the filters that are actually made for this device, it's burned on one of the slowest drippers that you can get. This one is pretty damn close. This one's slow too. This one you can manipulate a little bit more. You're gonna have to use a little bit finer grind with this particular brewer, just because if you don't do it, the coarseness of the grounds is just gonna let it just seek out and just go out really quickly. Again, you just gotta play around with these things. At the end of the day, these companies have engineered these the best way that they can. But we are coffee brewers. We are trying to understand the device for what it is. And as we look at it and kind of analyze it, this brewer, as much as it looks wacky and crazy, I am dumbfounded by it. The most that you could put in it is about 30 grams. And I used my EK43 just for a test on it. It was dark roast. So I did 30 grams. So I did 450 grams of water. So that's a 15-to-1. The brew took about 4.5 minutes or something like that. And I purposely, because I tried it before, and I'm like, something about this seems kind of odd. On the fellow O2, I went ahead and did like a 7 or 8 on the grinder. And I've talked about this before. My little rant is true, that most of the grinders are crap. So they have this degree of use from 1 to whatever it may be, right? Truthfully though, for the fellow old 8 all the way to 1. So it goes up to 11. So those other grind settings are crap, right? But I was pleasantly surprised how a medium roast on the 8 extracted okay. So I try to experiment with this grinder and with this brewer on the EK43. And if you know, the EK43 goes from 1 to 11. And it's really the grinder that's as balanced as can be. You can use it. I've used it from 11 to 3, kind of stopped at 3. I used to use it for espresso, but it doesn't go, it's finicky, whatever. It's a coffee burst. I kid you not. I know it was dark roast. Usually for 1.5, for 1 to 15, I get an extraction about 1.45 to 1.5, get me about 20% extraction. I got 1.9 at 11. As coarse as it can be. Coffee was good. It was sweet. No real bitterness. It was kind of freaked me out. And I think it's because of this design. When you see the coffee on the bed of it, it kind of just chills. It just kind of just takes its time. So the amount of water that passes through the grounds is extremely slow. So this brewer is perfect for a coarser grind of coffee. You can do it with a fine grind, but a lot of times you're going to get a lot over extraction. So you're going to have to play around with that yourself. I can give you a recipe and all that stuff, but at the end of the day, it's about you trying to figure it out for yourself of how to use these brewers. So the reason why I'm doing all this is because when I'm thinking about coffee, I always have this engineering background, always lingering in my back of the head and trying to understand of like why people do what they do. What's the biggest difference? But it's kind of funny when I say this because I can talk about the design. We can see how coffee is actually manipulated through the water, and that's the shape that it takes, the shape that it takes. And we can play around with different filters and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, the coffees still mimic something comparable to each other. But at the end of the day, with the Hario V60, with the Deep 27, with any of these that we're using, the biggest takeaway is to truly understand what you're dealing with. Don't look at any recipes. You just want to look at this video. I can say that, right? And just take your time with your devices. You know? See what it's all about. Because at the end of the day, that's all you have going for you. Those are some of the things that you're trying to think about and analyze and get to the point to where you are one with your machine. You understand that if you put this coffee inside of it, if you do this particular technique, that you're going to get something magical. And you actually understand exactly what you're doing in this whole thing. So I think that's the biggest takeaway. Understand. Get to a point to where you can really just master the craft of making your cup of coffee, no matter what you use. Even if it is an AeroPress or French press, Hario V60, a Mugen, origami. Oh, this one's pretty badass. A Deep 27 or flatbed brewer. Think about it, analyze it, see why it works, see why it doesn't work, see which coffees work really well with it, and just have fun with it. This is OK at Everyday Bean signing off. I'll talk to you later. Bye.